the language of a liar. In the small, fog-drenched town of Black Hollow, secrets were currency, and lies were the language everyone spoke fluently. But no one wielded deception quite like Elias Graves, a man of charm and contradiction. Elias was the town's most respected historian, a keeper of its past, and, unbeknownst to most, its most prolific liar. Elias had a way with words. He could spin a tale so vivid, so convincing, that even the most skeptical listener would find themselves nodding along, caught in the web of his eloquence. His lies weren't malicious, or so he told himself. They were simply stories, embellishments to make life more interesting. But in Black Hollow, where the past was as murky as the fog that clung to the cobblestone streets, Elias's lies had a way of taking on a life of their own. It all began with a book, tucked away in the dusty archives of the town's library. Elias discovered an ancient, leather-bound tome titled The Chronicles of Black Hollow. Its pages were filled with cryptic symbols and half-finished stories about the town's founding. Intrigued, Elias began to decipher the text, but when he hit a dead end, he did what he did best. He filled in the gaps with his own imagination. He started small, telling the town's folk tales of brave settlers and hidden treasures. But soon, his stories grew darker, more elaborate. He spoke of a curse that had plagued Black Hollow for centuries, a curse tied to the mysterious disappearance of the town's founder, Nathaniel Black. According to Elias, Nathaniel had made a pact with a shadowy figure in the woods, trading his soul for the town's prosperity. But the figure had betrayed him, and Nathaniel's spirit still wandered the forest, seeking vengeance. The town folk ate it up. They began seeing signs of the curse everywhere, strange noises in the night, shadows that moved on their own, crops that withered without explanation. Fear spread like wildfire, and Elias, the self-proclaimed expert on the curse, became the town's reluctant hero. But not everyone was convinced. Myra Finch, the town's school teacher and Elias's childhood friend, had always been able to see through his lies. She watched with growing concern as the town descended into paranoia, fueled by Elias's stories. One evening, she confronted him in the library, her sharp green eyes piercing through his carefully constructed facade. "You need to stop this, Elias," she said, her voice firm. "These stories of yours, they're hurting people. You're hurting people." Elias bristled. "I'm not hurting anyone. I'm giving them something to believe in, something to unite them." "You're giving them fear," Myra shot back, "and fear has a way of turning people against each other." Elias opened his mouth to argue but stopped when a loud crash echoed through the library. They turned to see a bookshelf toppled over, its contents spilled across the floor, and there, amidst the scattered books, was a single, blood-red envelope. With trembling hands, Elias picked it up. Inside was a note, written in the same cryptic symbols as the Chronicles, but this time, the message was clear: the liar will be the first to fall. Panic surged through Elias. He tried to brush it off as a prank, but deep down, he knew better. The curse he had invented was no longer just a story, it had become real. Over the next few days, strange things began happening to Elias. He heard whispers in the wind, saw figures lurking in the corners of his vision. The townfolk, now fully convinced of the curse, started avoiding him, as if he were the source of their misfortune. Even Mara kept her distance, though her eyes still held a glimmer of concern. Desperate, Elias returned to the library, hoping to find answers in the Chronicles, but the book was gone. In its place was another note: "The truth will set you free." Elias realized then that he had been lying to himself as much as he had lied to others. The curse wasn't real, it was a manifestation of his own guilt, his own fear of being exposed. He had spent so long hiding behind his stories that he had forgotten who he truly was. With Mara's help, Elias began to unravel the web of lies he had woven. He confessed to the townsfolk, admitting that the curse was nothing more than a fabrication. To his surprise, they didn't turn on him. Instead, they thanked him for his honesty, for giving them the truth they had been craving. But the red envelope still haunted him. One night, as Elias sat alone in the library, he heard a soft rustling. He turned to see a figure standing in the shadows, a man with hollow eyes and a familiar face. "Nathaniel Black, you thought you could outrun the truth," Nathaniel said, his voice a whisper, "but the truth always finds its way home." Elias woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The library was empty, the envelope gone, but the message lingered in his mind: the liar will be the first to fall. From that day on, Elias vowed to speak only the truth. But in Black Hollow, where the past was never truly buried, he couldn't shake the feeling that his lies had awakened something far darker than he could ever imagine. And so, The language of a liar gave way to the silence of the cursed, and Elias Graves learned that some stories are better left untold. "Here," he said, reaching for her hand, but as their fingers touched, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the room. The figure of Nathaniel Black materialized before them, his hollow eyes gleaming with malice. "You thought you could escape the truth," he said, his voice a rasping whisper, "but the chain is broken, and the shadows are free." Elias's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you want?" Nathaniel's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I want what you took from me, my story, my legacy. You twisted it into lies, and now you must pay the price." Mara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We're not afraid of you, whatever you are. You're just a story, and stories can be rewritten." Nathaniel's laughter grew louder, filling the room. "Then rewrite this." He lunged at them, his form dissolving into a swirling mass of shadows. Elias and Mara stumbled back, their hands still clasped tightly together. As the shadows closed in, Elias remembered the symbol, the broken chain. "The chain," he shouted. "It's not just a symbol, it's a binding. We have to restore it." Mara nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. Together, they began to recite the words from the parchment. "The chain must remain unbroken, lest the shadows rise again." The shadows recoiled, hissing like steam on a hot stove. Elias and Mara continued, their voices growing stronger. Nathaniel knew the cost, but his pride doomed us all. The room began to shake, the walls groaning as if the very fabric of reality were unraveling. Nathaniel's form flickered, his face contorted with rage. "You cannot undo what has been done." "Yes, we can," Elias said, his voice firm, "because this time, we're telling the truth." With a final, deafening roar, the shadows collapsed in on themselves, vanishing into nothingness. The lights flickered back on, and the room fell silent. Elias and Mara stood amidst the wreckage, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The symbol of the broken chain was gone, replaced by a new mark on the floor, a circle, unbroken and whole. For the first time in years, Elias felt a sense of peace. The lies had been exposed, the truth set free, but as he looked at Mara, he knew their work wasn't over. "We have to make sure this never happens again," he said. Mara smiled, squeezing his hand. "Then let's start writing a new story, one we can be proud of." And so, in the quiet town of Black Hollow, the language of a liar gave way to the power of truth. But in the shadows, where the past still lingered, the echoes of Nathaniel's laughter served as a reminder. Some stories are never truly finished. The language of a liar, Part 3. The weeks that followed the confrontation with Nathaniel Black were a time of healing for Black Hollow. The fog that had clung to the town for generations began to lift, revealing a sky so clear it felt like a new beginning. Elias and Mara worked tirelessly to restore the town's archives, ensuring that the true history of Black Hollow was preserved. But even as the town moved forward, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching him. The symbol of the unbroken chain became a beacon of hope for the townsfolk. They painted it on their doors, wore it as pendants, and even etched it into the town square's cobblestones. It was a reminder that the past could be confronted and that truth could prevail. Yet, for Elias, the symbol felt like a warning, a reminder that the shadows were never truly gone. One evening, as Elias locked up the library, he noticed a faint glow coming from the archives. He followed the light to the back room, where the Chronicles of Black Hollow lay open on the table. The pages, once filled with cryptic symbols, now bore a new message, written in a hand that was unmistakably Nathaniel's. "The chain is unbroken, but the key is lost. Find it, or the shadows will return." Elias's heart raced. He called Mara, and together they examined the book. The message was clear. Nathaniel's spirit had been bound, but the source of his power, the key, was still out there. If it fell into the wrong hands, the shadows could rise again. "We have to find it," Mara said, her voice steady. "But where do we even start?" Elias flipped through the pages of the Chronicles, searching for clues. He found a map of Black Hollow, drawn in intricate detail, with the symbol of the chain marking several locations: the old Grayson Manor, the town cemetery, and a forgotten chapel deep in the woods. "These places," Elias said, tracing the map with his finger, "they're connected. If we're going to find the key, we need to start here." The next morning, Elias and Mara set out for the Grayson Manor. The once grand estate was now a crumbling ruin, its walls covered in ivy and its windows shattered. As they stepped inside, the air grew cold, and the faint sound of whispers echoed through the halls. In the manor's library, they found a journal belonging to Eleanor Grayson, Nathaniel's rival. Her words painted a picture of a woman consumed by grief and rage. She spoke of a ritual, a way to bind Nathaniel's spirit and protect the town, but the ritual required a key, a physical object imbued with the power to control the shadows. The key isn't just a metaphor, Mara said, her eyes wide. It's real, and if we don't find it, someone else will. Their search led them to the town cemetery, where they discovered a hidden crypt beneath the Grayson family plot. Inside, they found a chest adorned with the symbol of the chain, but when Elias opened it, the chest was empty. It's gone, he said, his voice hollow. Someone beat us to it. Mara knelt beside the chest, examining the lock. It was forced open recently. The scratches are fresh. As they left the crypt, Elias noticed a figure watching them from the edge of the cemetery. It was a man in a dark coat, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. Before Elias could call out, the man turned and disappeared into the woods. We're not the only ones looking for the key, Mara said, her voice tense. Their final stop was the forgotten chapel in the woods. The building was overgrown with moss, its steeple leaning precariously to one side. Inside, they found evidence of recent activity, candles burned down to stubs, a circle drawn in ash on the floor, and a book of rituals lying open on the altar. Elias picked up the book, his hands trembling as he read the passage. To summon the shadows, one must possess the key and speak the words of binding. But beware, for the shadows hunger, and they will consume all in their path. Before they could react, the chapel doors slammed shut, and the candles flickered out. The man in the dark coat stepped out of the shadows, holding a small, ornate box. The key. You're too late, he said, his voice dripping with malice. The shadows will rise again, and this time, there will be no one to stop them. Elias recognized the man as Victor Grayson, a descendant of the Grayson family who had disappeared years ago. Victor had been searching for the key, hoping to use its power to reclaim his family's lost glory. You don't understand what you're doing, Mara said, stepping forward. The shadows will destroy everything, including you. Victor laughed, a cold, hollow sound. I'm willing to take that risk. He opened the box, revealing a jagged, black shard that pulsed with dark energy. As he began to chant the words of binding, the chapel trembled, and the shadows came alive, swirling around him like a storm. Elias and Mara acted quickly. They recited the words of the unbroken chain, their voices rising above Victor's chant. The symbol on the floor glowed brightly, and the shadows hesitated, torn between Victor's command and the power of the chain. In a final, desperate move, Elias lunged at Victor, knocking the key from his hands. The shard shattered on the floor, releasing a burst of light that banished the shadows and sent Victor sprawling. The chapel fell silent. Victor lay unconscious, and the key was destroyed. Elias and Mara stood amidst the wreckage, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. It's over, Mara said, her voice barely a whisper. Elias nodded, but as he looked at the shattered remains of the key, he couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were still out there, waiting. The next day, the townfolk gathered in the square to celebrate their victory, but Elias and Mara knew the truth. The battle was far from over. The shadows had been banished, but the key was gone, and the chain was only as strong as the truth that bound it. As the sun set over Black Hollow, Elias stood at the edge of the woods, staring into the darkness. The language of a liar had brought the shadows to life, but the language of truth had kept them at bay, for now. And in the quiet of the night, Elias swore he could hear Nathaniel's laughter, a reminder that some stories never truly end.